So way back in 2020, I released a video where I introduced my then new project car, a 1971 Opel GT that I called the Hopeful Opel. And since that video, I have released nothing else about this car, but the truth is a lot has happened. And so today, for the first time on video, I'm going through the entire saga of the Hopeful Opel, my 1971 Opel GT project car. Let's start with the name. This car was obviously a pile of junk when I got it. It was in such terrible condition that I came up with the name because of the sheer amount of optimism that someone needed to have to even try to bring this car back to life. It was rusted out, it didn't run, parts were missing, and it hadn't been on the road since the 1980s, and so I called it the Hopeful Opel, and the name kind of stuck. Now, why an Opel GT? The truth is, I have wanted one of these cars basically ever since I discovered them. I'm a huge fan of the C3 Corvette, and if you look at the lines of the Opel GT, they're pretty similar. The Opel kind of looks like a mini Corvette, and that's because in a way, they share a stylist. The GM stylist Claire McKeegan did work on the Corvette project, although mostly the C2, and also the Opel GT. And so I like that Corvette design lineage between the two, and they're just such a cute look, and they're such a rare and interesting car that I had to have one. I really wanted one, and I had an opportunity to actually have one because of my good friend Todd. He knew I was into these cars, he knew I wanted one. Long story short, he had a long drive and an empty trailer, came across a very cheap Opel GT, scooped it up, and then offered it to me for the price he paid, plus his fuel and expenses for the trip. And so for $300, I bought that yellow Opel GT that you see, but it also came with a red parts car. We'll get more into the parts car later, but for $300, I had an Opel GT. Now, not only did Todd set me up with this sweetheart deal on this old car, but he also let me store it at his property and let me use his fully outfitted shop to fix it up. And Todd had like a full shop with a welder, metal fabrication stuff and tools and all the things I would need to bring this car back. So truly without his help and resources, I wouldn't have been able to take on this project in the first place. So that's how I ended up with the car. Let's talk about what I bought for $300. It's a 1971 Opel GT, and the story goes that the last person who'd owned it before me, he took it apart to do a clutch replacement on the car in the 1980s, but the car never went back together. It just sat around, and while it sat, it rusted out. Water got in through the ruined door seals, and basically the entire floor of the car was gone. And it had rusted like beyond the cosmetics. The seats were falling to the floor, the suspension attachment points were kind of just hanging into nothing. It needed real structural work for this car to be a car again. But I was so in love with the shape, and the buy-in price was so cheap, I couldn't say no, and so I began work on the Hopeful Opel. The first couple steps were basically just cleaning out all the junk, cutting away the rust, and seeing what metal I had to actually work with. The first order of business for me was to basically build the floor back. And on this car, the seat frames are actually a structural element. They tie the rocker to the transmission tunnel and all that. And so I made these out of bar stock, and then I made a floor pan out of an old washing machine skin. And I also started working on the structural element of the rocker panels. They're double wall in this car. I made the inner ones, and I made the seat frame for the passenger side. This car needed a lot of rust work. And it's worth noting that this car was stored an hour away from my house. Todd's house is like an hour from mine. So basically every weekend I hopped in a car and I drove an hour to work on this thing. I froze in the winter, I roasted in the summer. I worked basically outside year round on this car. But the most fun I had was that I got to work on this car with almost like all of my friends.
What are you doing, Tapas?
I'm gonna cut some Opel.
I convinced a lot of people to go a long way out of their way to help me work on this car, and I really loved it. It was so much fun to work with people, and I taught a lot of people kind of how to weld on this car because you're not gonna hurt anything. Grab a welding gun and let's get started, because if it's bad, well, you're still not making this car worse. This car couldn't get any worse. And so work progressed on the car for a long time, and I enjoyed working on it with my friends. One of my favorite parts of this project was actually retrieving the parts car. Like I said earlier, when I bought this car, I got the yellow one, which was the good car, and they also got a red parts car, which was even rustier, than the yellow one, and it was located at the bottom of this like ravine. So I recruited a bunch of friends and we went out there and we actually dragged it up that steep hill with a vintage Quigley Ford van. And that was just such a fun day to drag this thing out of the woods where it had been stashed for, I don't know, a couple decades and bring it back to the light of day. That was a really fun part of the project. Now, it was a good use of time because the red parts car, even though it was even rustier than the yellow one, yielded a lot of cool parts like these Shelby mag wheels. I don't know if they're directly linked to Carroll Shelby, and I can't find a lot of information about them, but if you look on the inside of the wheel, they were cast and they said Shelby on the inside of the wheel. So good enough for me. I had Shelby wheels, and I actually bought a set of brand new tires, and I had them mounted and I had them bolted onto the yellow car, and it actually looked really cool. I love the look of the slot mags, and I got to say I had Shelby wheels on my Opel. But the red car loaned a bunch of other stuff, a lot of interior parts. The chrome bumpers front and back were in really good shape on the red car, so it was definitely a worthwhile use of time. But of all the work I did on the yellow car, the most satisfying was making it run. My friend El Alder and Todd and a couple others came by the farm one day and we got this thing to actually run off a can of ether. It was surprisingly easy. All I had to do was replace some basic ignition components. I think it was the rotor, the cap, and some spark plug wires. And with a little bit of starting fluid down the carb and some 12 volts to the starter, it actually started and ran. This engine was miraculously in good shape considering how derelict the rest of the car was. Things started to go downhill in the project, however, around 2022. So basically, I had been working at this car at Todd's property for a long time, and that was a great arrangement. However, Todd eventually listed that property for sale, and the Opel had to go to my own house. So I worked on it at my own house for about a year throughout 2022, but at the end of the year, I made the tough decision to put it up for sale. The reason was at the time I was really ramping up the effort I was putting into my own video editing business, and that turned out to be a good investment of my time, but it also meant I couldn't invest that time into the Opel to make it work. And so I just didn't have the time to finish the car to the way that it should have been, and also I just wanted a car that worked. At this point, it was 3 years working on this car. I hadn't driven it, and I wanted something that I could enjoy. And so for all those reasons, I made the tough decision to put the car up for sale, and it eventually went to a very excited owner. It is worth noting that I actually also did sort out the registration nightmare of this thing. When I got it, it was essentially an abandoned car. I sorted the title, I sorted the registration. It was actually a legally plated vehicle. So that's the takeaway. Essentially, I owned this car for 3 years. I worked on it for 3 years, and I never drove it a single inch. And that's the biggest reason why I never published anything about this car. Is it always seemed like a letdown to me that this project never really got done. That said, there are a few silver linings from this project why I'm not completely sour on the whole thing. The first thing is I learned to weld with this car. When I started this project, I did not know anything about welding and metal fab, and I'm hardly an expert, but I at least learned the basics. I learned how to use a metal brake, I learned how to weld, I learned how to cut and shape metal, and it was a great way for me to learn the basics on a car that, like I said earlier, couldn't have gotten any worse, and it was a great place to learn, and I taught a few of my friends the basics too, so that's a skill I got to keep, and that's probably my favorite part of the whole project. The second thing that I loved about the experience was the Opel community. They were fun, they were supportive, they helped me source parts, they answered all my questions. I had so many Ricky questions about these cars. At every step, they were helpful and a joy to deal with, and honestly, some of the people I met through this Opel experience are still my friends, and we still keep up. And honestly, had I owned it longer, that would have continued to be one of my favorite parts of the experience, is that the Opel community is just so cool. What a cool niche of car enthusiasts, and Opel people, you guys are the best. And in the end, the empty slot in the garage left by the departing Opel was filled by the 1974 Ford Maverick that I co-own with my cousin. And that car has been so much fun. It's not everyone's dream car, a 74 Maverick sedan, but it's a car that works, it's nice, and I love driving and enjoying that car. So what did I learn through this entire process? I think the biggest thing I learned was the true cost of a project. I cut a lot of corners. I didn't care that parts of it were ugly and not restored correctly. I just wanted it to work. And even then, it was a monster of a project. It took me forever. And maybe there are people out there that can complete a task like this in a reasonable time frame, but I learned through this process that I am not one of them. I think that I learned that there's no such thing as a quick restoration. If I was going to take on a project, I would do it the right way, take my time and lovingly bring a car back as it properly should have been. I'm not really interested in trying to scab together a junkyard car quick and dirty like I tried to with the Opel GT. I think that's my biggest takeaway. But now I have a question for you, the audience. I shot video of every single day of every single part that I ever worked on this car. I have enough footage to make like a full hour-long episode about the Opel GT Saga. But like I said at the beginning of this video, I haven't published anything like that because I wasn't sure there would be interest in a project car that, well, didn't get finished. But let me know in the comments, are you interested in seeing more Opel GT? If there's enough interest, then yeah, I'll put it together and you can see the entire saga here on the channel. And as always, thank you so much for liking, commenting, subscribing, all that YouTuber stuff. It really does help me make more videos like this one, and it's been so much fun to engage with people about classic cars. And you never know, I might pick up another Opel GT in the future, but probably for a bit more money and in a little bit better condition. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and let me know in the comments if you want to see more Opel GT content. Holy crap!
You have a car.
It works!
See?
2 years! Ah!
And you were gonna send it off for me.
Oh! Tell me that was recording.
You gonna run it some more, Clayton? You wanna hear it? Let's get
Yeah.
it. So did you?
Wir haben auch für Sie einen passenden Wagen. Opel.